The lights died all at once. Not the slow fade Sofia was used to, the gentle dimming that meant the technician upstairs had finally finished his cigarette and remembered her. This was a hard cut, every bulb in the old Teatro Aurelio snuffed in the same breath, the warm gold of the rehearsal lamp swallowed whole, until the only thing left in the world was the single column of white falling on the center of the stage, on her. She stopped mid-arabesque, one leg still suspended, her arms still carving the air, and for a moment she held the pose out of sheer animal instinct, the way a deer freezes when the grass moves wrong. The theater breathed around her, 200 years of dust and varnish and salt air drifting in off the harbor, the gilt cherubs on the box seats blackened to silhouettes, the great chandelier overhead reduced to a constellation of dead crystal. "Marco," she called toward the booth. "Marco, the house lights." Silence answered, the kind of silence that has weight, the kind that listens back. And then from the dark, a voice, low, unhurried, a man's voice accustomed to being the only one heard in any room. "Don't stop." Sofia's heart slammed sideways. She came down out of the pose too fast, ankle-wrenching, and spun toward the seats, throwing one hand up against the glare of the spotlight that pinned her like a moth. "Who's there? The theater's closed. There's no performance tonight." "I know." A pause she could have driven a car through. "I bought it." She laughed, a short, frightened sound. "You bought a ticket." "I bought the theater." The way he said it, there was no boast in it at all. He stated it the way other men said it's raining, and that more than the dark, more than the voice, was what made the cold start crawling up her spine. Her eyes were adjusting now, the spotlight bleeding out toward the front rows, and she saw him. One man, just one seated dead center in the first row, where the orchestra would have been if there had been an orchestra. A long black coat, hands folded, stillness so complete it looked rehearsed. Behind him, every other seat in the auditorium, 1,000 of them climbing up into the dark in tiers of red velvet, sat empty. He had emptied an entire opera house to watch her dance alone. "I'm going to call someone," she said, and her voice didn't shake, which she would be proud of later when she had time to be anything other than terrified. "Marco's gone home," the man said. "He's been paid well for the inconvenience. Everyone has." He shifted just slightly, and the spill of light caught the lower half of his face, a hard jaw, a mouth that did not know how to smile, a faint, pale line of an old scar threading down from the corner of his lip. "I'm not here to frighten you, Sofia." The sound of her own name in his mouth stopped her cold. "How do you know my name?" And the man in the black coat was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, there was something underneath the calm that she could not name, something old and worn smooth, like a stone carried in a pocket for 20 years. "I've known your name," he said, "longer than you have." His name was Lorenzo Vitale, and in the 3 coastal provinces between Trapani and the sea, men crossed themselves when they said it, and women pulled their children indoors. He owned the harbor that fed the town, and the trucks that left it, and the judges who pretended not to notice either. He had inherited an empire of fear from a father he despised, and he ran it the way a surgeon runs a theater of his own, coldly, precisely, with a horror of waste and no patience for cruelty that served no purpose. He was 38 years old, and had not been touched by a single thing in 19 of them, until a girl in a second-hand leotard had bent into a slow développé under a dying spotlight in a theater he didn't yet own, and he had felt the floor of his chest give way. But Sofia knew none of that. Sofia knew only that the most dangerous-looking man she had ever seen was rising now from his seat, unfolding to a height that seemed to keep going, and walking without hurry, hands loose at his sides toward the lip of the stage. She backed up a step for every step he took. The spotlight followed her like an accusation. "Stop," she said. "Stay there." He stopped. He actually stopped 1 foot on the orchestra stairs, and that obedience unsettled her more than pursuit would have. He looked up at her from below the angle, carving his face into planes of shadow, and his eyes, she could see them now, dark and very steady, moved over her, not the way men's eyes usually moved over her, hungry and grasping, but the way a man looks at something he has lost and found, and is afraid to touch. "You hurt your ankle," he said, "when the light startled you. You came down on the outside of the foot. You should ice it tonight." "How long?" Sofia whispered. "Have you been watching me?" The question hung in the dust. "Long enough," said Lorenzo Vitale, "to keep you alive." She ran. Of course she ran. She was 26 and penniless and alone in a locked theater, with a man who owned it, and every instinct her mother had never lived long enough to give her screamed, "Go." She bolted into the wings, past the rope and pulley dark of the backstage, slammed through the stage door, and stopped. The narrow alley behind the Teatro Aurelio, which on any normal night held nothing but garbage and the occasional cat, was full of cars. 3 of them. Black, long, engines off, lights off, sitting in the rain that had begun to fall while she danced. And leaning against them, motionless, were men. 6 of them, maybe 8. They did not move toward her. They did not need to. They simply watched her come stumbling out into the wet, and not one of them was surprised to see her. And she understood with a lurch that these men had been here all evening, that they were always here, that she had walked through this alley 100 times and never once been alone in it. The rain came down harder. She stood frozen on the step, her thin practice clothes soaking through, and behind her, the stage door opened and Lorenzo's voice said gently, almost tiredly, "They won't touch you. Nobody touches you. That's the entire point of them." She turned. He stood in the doorway, with the theater's dark behind him, and the rain had begun to darken his shoulders, and he was holding out his own coat to her, the long black coat off his back, an offering across 6 feet of wet cobblestone. "You're going to catch cold," he said, "and then you'll favor the ankle, and then you'll fall in the Giselle and tear something, and I'll have done all of this for nothing." He took 1 step out into the rain, the coat extended. "Take it. I won't come closer." And the strangest thing, the thing she could not explain to herself that night, or for many nights after, was that she did. She crossed the wet stones, and she took the warm, heavy coat from his hands. And the moment her fingers brushed his, he went absolutely still, the way a man goes still when a wild thing he has loved from a distance finally lands on his open palm. He did not close his hand. He did not grab. He let her take the coat and step back. And only then did he exhale. And she saw in that exhale that whatever this was, it was costing him something enormous. "Who wants me dead?" she asked. The rain ran down his scarred jaw. "Get in the car," Lorenzo said, "and I'll tell you the half of it you're ready to hear." She should not have gotten in the car. She knew that, and she got in anyway, because the alternative was the rain and the dark and a town full of doors that she was beginning to suspect had all been opened by him. The car smelled of leather and cold, and something faintly like cedar. He sat across from her, not beside her, keeping the whole width of the cabin between them, his hands open on his knees where she could see them. The black cars pulled out into the streaming streets in a slow procession past the shuttered gelaterias, and the church with the broken clock, and the harbor where the fishing boats knocked together in the wind. "You were 6 years old," Lorenzo said, watching the rain crawl across the glass, "the night your family was killed." Sofia's whole body went to ice. "My parents died in a fire," she said. "A gas leak. The orphanage." There was no gas leak. His voice didn't rise. It never rose, she would learn. The more terrible the thing he was saying, the quieter he became. "Your father was Tommaso Marchetti. He was a magistrate. An honest one. There were so few that the ones who existed became famous simply for existing. He had spent 4 years building a case against a shipping concern in this town that was moving more than fish through that harbor." His eyes flicked to her, then away. He had names, account numbers. He had enough to put away 3 generations of one family. And so, on a night in October 20 years ago, that family sent men to his house in the hills, and they killed your father and your mother and your 2 brothers, and they set the house on fire to hide what they had done. The car was very warm, and she was very cold. "That's not," her voice cracked. "I'm Sofia Ricci. I grew up at Santa Lucia. The sisters. The sisters were paid to take in a girl with no past and ask no questions. And they raised you well, and they never knew where the money came from." He turned to look at her fully now, and the streetlights slid across his face in bars of gold and shadow. "Your name is Sofia Marchetti. You are the only one of your family who lived. And the reason you lived." He stopped. For the first time all night, Lorenzo Vitale could not finish a sentence. "Tell me," Sofia said. "The reason you lived," he said, "is that the men who came to your house that night brought a boy with them, the Don's son, 12 years old. They brought him to watch, to harden him, to make a man of him, to show him what the family did to its enemies." His jaw worked, and the boy found a child hiding in a wardrobe upstairs while the house burned below, a little girl with dark hair, holding her ears, and the boy did the only disobedient thing he would do for the next 20 years of his life. He carried her out the back through the orchard, and he hid her in the trunk of a car, and he told his father she had died in the fire, with the rest. The rain roared on the roof. Sofia could not breathe. "You," she whispered. "Me," said Lorenzo. She did not scream. She would think about that later, too, that she didn't scream, didn't claw at the door, didn't do any of the things a sane woman should have done, upon learning she was sitting in a car with a man whose family had butchered hers. Instead, she sat very straight in the warmth of his coat, and she looked at the man across from her, and she understood that the entire architecture of her life, the scholarship that came at 14, when the convent could no longer afford her training, the patron who paid for Paris, the company in Naples that took her with no audition, the broken-down theater in this forgotten town that somehow always found the money to mount a production with a principal role exactly her size, that all of it, every door, every miracle, every impossible piece of luck, had a name, and the name was sitting 3 feet away from her, with his hands open on his knees. "You bought my whole life," she said. "I gave you a life," he said. "There's a difference." "Is there?" He was quiet. "You took everything from me," she said. "And then you spent 20 years giving me back small pieces of it and calling it generosity. I never had a single thing of my own. Not one. Every door I ever walked through you opened. Every time I thought I did this, I didn't. You did." She heard her own voice climbing and dragged it back down, because she would be damned before she'd weep in front of this man. The scholarship at 14, that was you. Yes. Paris. Yes. The company in Naples that happened to need a soloist. They needed nothing. They were paid to discover you. A muscle moved in his cheek. You were good enough that within a year they would have begged you to stay regardless. But yes, the door was mine. And tonight, her voice was a thread now. The empty theater, the 1,000 empty seats. That was selfish, Lorenzo said. And for the first time, something raw broke through the calm. That was the one thing I did for me and not for you. 20 years I watched you from the back of rooms, from across streets, from the dark of theaters, with 1,000 other people between us. And I wanted once to be the only one watching, to have nothing between us but the light. He looked away, ashamed, and the shame on a face like his was a terrible thing to witness. I shouldn't have. You found out. That was the risk. I knew it was the risk. And I did it anyway because I'm not a good man, Sofia, and I've stopped pretending otherwise, especially with you. The car had stopped. She realized only now that they had been parked for some time outside a wrought iron gate, beyond which a long white house glowed on the cliffs above the black and heaving sea. "Why are you telling me now?" she asked. 20 years of silence. Why tonight? And Lorenzo Vitale, who feared nothing in this world that she had ever heard of, looked at her with something that was unmistakably fear. "Because someone else has found out you're alive," he said, "and he was the one who ordered you dead the first time." The house on the cliff was beautiful, the way a held breath is beautiful. All white stone, and tall windows and rooms that opened onto rooms, candlelight and old books, and the constant low thunder of the sea below. There were men at the doors, and men in the garden, and a woman named Rosaria, who ran the kitchen and looked at Sofia when she came in, dripping in Lorenzo's coat, with an expression of such open grief and tenderness that Sofia understood the woman had been waiting years to lay eyes on her. "You knew," Sofia said to her. "I held you," Rosaria said simply, "the night he brought you out of the fire. You were so small. I have prayed for you every day for 20 years, Bambina." And then the old woman put her face in her apron and left the room rather than be seen weeping, and Sofia stood alone in the candlelit hall and felt the foundations of her whole self quietly shifting. She did not sleep. She sat at the window of a guest room that smelled faintly of lavender, a room she realized that had been kept ready for years, a room with ballet bar bolted to one wall, and a shelf of books on dance, and a window seat positioned exactly to catch the morning light. A dancer would want to stretch in, and she watched the storm come in off the water, and she tried to hate him, and she could not get the hatred to hold its shape. The man had murdered her family. The man had saved her at 12, at the cost of the only thing he had, his father's approval, in a world where his father's disapproval was lethal. The man had spent 2 decades and a fortune ensuring she never wanted for anything. The man had never once let her choose any of it. She was still at the window at 3 in the morning when she saw him down in the garden in the rain. He had not gone to bed either. He stood at the cliff's edge with his back to the house, the storm soaking him through perfectly. still looking out at the lightning over the sea. He stood like a man at a grave. He stood there for an hour, and though she told herself she felt nothing, she found that she could not make herself leave the window while he was out there in the rain, and that she would understand much later was the precise moment the whole thing became impossible to undo. The man who wanted her dead was named Cesare Vitale. My uncle, Lorenzo said the next morning, spreading photographs across the long table in a room with no windows. My father's younger brother. When my father died, the family should have passed to me. Cesare expected it to pass to him. He tapped a grainy, long lens photograph of a heavy, silver-haired man getting out of a car. It didn't. I took it. He spent 11 years smiling at me across dinner tables and waiting. What does that have to do with me? Lorenzo's jaw tightened. Your father's case, 20 years ago. The case that got your family killed. He slid another document toward her, a faded land deed, an old map of the harbor. It was Cesare's operation your father was about to dismantle. Cesare gave the order. My father, to his eternal discredit, agreed to carry it out because the family came before everything, even before the murder of children. His voice was flat, with old disgust. But the case never died with your father. The evidence existed. It was filed, sealed, lost in the machinery of a court that was too frightened to touch it. And as long as no Marchetti lived to reopen it, it stayed lost. He looked at her. You are a Marchetti, Sofia. The harbor your father was investigating is worth more now than it was then. Far more. The land grants, the contested deeds, the inheritance that should have passed to you. The moment anyone with your name and your blood stands up in the light and says that was mine, and they stole it, Cesare's entire fortune comes apart, and the old murder comes back to life, and he hangs. The pieces turned in her mind like a lock. So as long as I'm alive, she said slowly, I'm a threat to him. As long as you're alive and he knows it. Lorenzo gathered the photographs with sudden violence. For 20 years he thought you died in the fire. I made sure of it. I built you a dead girl's grave and a living girl's secret, and kept them in separate rooms his whole life. His knuckles were white. And 3 weeks ago, one of his men saw you dance in Palermo and recognized your mother's face. And now Cesare knows, and he will not make the mistake of using strangers this time. He'll come himself, or send the one man even I can't buy. Then why not just... Sofia stopped appalled at what she'd been about to say. But Lorenzo finished it for her gently, without judgment. Kill him first, he shook his head. He's my blood. The family won't follow a man who murders his own uncle without proof of betrayal. And I don't have it, not yet. If I move against him without it, half my men go to him, and we have a war. And in a war, the first thing both sides reach for is the other side's weakness. His eyes came up to hers and held. You're my weakness, Sofia. You've been my weakness since I was 12 years old. The only way to keep you safe is to keep you hidden, and to keep you here, where the walls are mine. She understood then the shape of the cage. A beautiful cage. A cage built of love, which is the only kind a person cannot bring herself to hate the builder for. A cage with a ballet bar on the wall, and a window that caught the morning light. I won't stay, she said. You will, said Lorenzo, if you want to live. That's not a choice. No, he agreed, and there was something almost like grief in it. It isn't. I've never been able to give you one. I've only ever been able to give you the good outcome and call it a gift, and hope you never notice the chain. He stood, and for a moment the cold mask slipped entirely, and underneath it, she saw a man who was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. I am trying, he said, to keep you breathing. I have never in my life been good at anything else where you're concerned. Forgive me, or don't. But stay. She stayed. The days that followed had the strange, suspended quality of a held note. She danced in the room with the bar because she could not dance. Movement was the only language in which she had ever told the truth, and her body needed to tell the truth, even when her mind refused to. And she discovered after the third day that he watched, not openly. He never came into the room. But there was a long gallery above the studio, with a railing, and in the late afternoons when the light went gold, she would catch a shadow there, the line of his shoulders, the stillness of him. And she learned that he came to watch her dance, the way other men went to church. He thought she couldn't see him. She let him think it, and slowly, against every reasonable instinct she possessed, the terror in her began to braid itself together with something else. It happened in pieces. It happened when she found in the library a shelf of books on the Marchetti case that he had collected over 20 years, every scrap, every clipping, kept the way a man keeps a wound open on purpose. It happened when Rosaria told her, weeping again, that the signore had never in 19 years brought a woman to this house, never let anyone touch the room with the bar, that he had built it the year Sofia turned 11 and started to dance, and had it cleaned weekly, and slept in it himself once, the night she'd had an injury in Naples, and he'd flown to the hospital and sat in the corridor all night, and never let her see him. It happened mostly in the things he did not do. The way he kept the width of every room between them. The way his hand reaching past her once for a book stopped an inch from her waist and withdrew as though burned. The way he looked at her across the dinner table and then made himself look away, over and over, a man rationing himself. "Why won't you touch me?" she asked, one night on the terrace, the sea black below them. His hand tightened on the stone balustrade. "Because if I start," he said, "I won't be able to pretend this is only protection anymore. And the moment it stops being only protection, you'll have even less of a choice than you do now. I will not add my hands to your chains, Sofia. Wanting you is the one thing I refuse to do to you." He turned to face her, and the moonlight made the old scar at his mouth into a thread of silver. "You may be the only person alive I've ever wanted to deserve, and I never will. So I'll keep the distance, and you'll keep your disgust, and at least one of us will get to keep something clean." She should have let him keep it. Instead, she crossed the terrace, and she stood close enough that he had to look down at her, and she said very quietly, "I'm tired of every choice in my life being made by you. Let me make this one." And she kissed the man who had buried her family. He did not move for a full second. Frozen. Undone. A man who had armored himself against everything in the world, except exactly this. And then his hand came up and cradled the back of her head, with a tenderness that did not match anything else about him, and he kissed her back like a man drinking after 20 years in a desert. And the sea thundered below, and somewhere out in the dark, Sofia would realize far too late, a long lens was watching them through the garden gate. The photograph arrived 3 days later. It came in a plain envelope, hand-delivered to the gate, addressed to Lorenzo in an elegant, old-fashioned hand. Inside was a single picture, Sofia on the terrace, in Lorenzo's arms, her face turned up to his in the moonlight, and on the back, in the same elegant hand, 3 words, "She's beautiful, nephew." Lorenzo went very, very still. Sofia had never seen him afraid before, not truly. She saw it now. It came off him like cold off ice. "He's telling me he knows where you are," Lorenzo said, "and that he knows what you are to me." He set the photograph face down on the table, with a control so absolute it was its own kind of violence. "It's a courtesy. He's giving me the chance to do the smart thing before he does the necessary one." "What's the smart thing?" "Send you away. Tonight. Out of the country, new name, no trail, never see you again." His voice did not change, but his eyes were terrible. "It's what I should do. It's what I've always done, kept you somewhere safe and stayed in the dark where you couldn't see me, right up until I got greedy and bought a theater." He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes, and the gesture made him suddenly the 12-year-old boy who had carried a girl out of a fire. "I can't do it again. God help me. I had 20 years of practice loving you from 100 yards away, and I can't go back to it now that I've—" He dropped his hands. "Now that I know what your mouth feels like." "Then don't send me away," Sofia said. "Finish it. You said you needed proof of his betrayal to move against him, so get it." "Proof doesn't appear because you need it." "It does," she said, "if you give him a reason to come out of the dark." She felt the plan assembling itself even as she spoke it, cold and clear, her father's daughter after all. "He wants the Marchetti heir dead before she can reopen the case and take back the harbor. So, let the Marchetti heir reopen the case." She lifted her chin. "Let her stand up in the light and say that was mine. Let her be loud and public and impossible to make disappear quietly. And when he comes for her in front of witnesses, when he sends his man or comes himself, that's your betrayal. That's the family seeing him move against your house in the open. That's your proof." Lorenzo stared at her. "You're proposing," he said slowly, "to use yourself as bait." "I'm proposing," Sofia said, "to make a choice, my first one, about my own life. Try to take it away from me and I'll do it without you." And something moved behind his eyes that she had never seen there, not fear, not hunger. Respect, terror's twin. The look of a man realizing the thing he has spent his life protecting has teeth of its own. "You are," he said softly, "exactly your father's daughter." He stood in the light too. It got him killed. It got him remembered, Sofia said. "There's a difference. You taught me that." The plan was elegant, and it was insane, and it nearly worked exactly as designed. They did it at the gala, the reopening of the restored Teatro Massimo in Palermo, the most public, most photographed, most impossible to do violence quietly night the calendar offered. Sofia would dance, not hidden, not anonymous, billed, named. Her real name printed in the program for the first time in 20 years, Sofia Marchetti, with a single line beneath it, placed by Lorenzo's people in 3 newspapers that morning, that the long-lost daughter of the murdered magistrate Tommaso Marchetti had survived, and had returned, and intended to see her family's case reopened. It was a flare fired straight up into the dark. It said, "Here I am, the one you missed. Come and try." Lorenzo's men were everywhere, in the boxes, in the wings, on the rooftops across the piazza, threaded through the black-tie crowd like a net pulled tight. And Cesare's men were everywhere too. You could feel them, a second net laid over the first. 2 armies in dinner jackets, smiling at each other over champagne, waiting. Sofia danced. She danced the way you dance when it might be the last time, which she was clear-eyed enough to know it might be. She danced her father's name back into the world. And from the wings in the dark, Lorenzo watched her, the way he had watched her for 20 years. Only this time she knew he was there, and this time, when she turned toward him, and the whole vast, jeweled house thought she was dancing for them. And she was not. She was dancing for the boy who carried her out of the fire. And in the third movement, the lights went out, hard, all at once. The same brutal cut as that first night in the empty theater, and Sofia understood in the half-second of total dark before the screaming started that Cesare had done it on purpose, that he had chosen to do it here, in front of everyone, because he had decided the smart thing was no longer enough, that an heir who would not stay hidden had to be erased in a way that frightened everyone watching into never speaking her name again. The first shot cracked across the auditorium like the sky breaking. Then chaos, the crowd surging. 1,000 people in evening dress stampeding for exits in the dark. The muzzle flashes strobing the gilded ceiling. The 2 armies in dinner jackets becoming, in an instant, exactly what they were. Sofia stood frozen, center stage in the spotlight that someone, somewhere, kept burning on her, on purpose. A target lit up for the shooter, and she saw the man on the catwalk above the far box raise the rifle, and she could not move, her body, that had never once failed her, finally failing. And she thought, with strange calm, so this is the room where it finally happens, the same as my father in the light. And then a weight hit her like the sea. Lorenzo. Crossing 40 feet of stage in the dark, in the time it takes to draw a breath, his whole body folding around hers, driving her down and sideways, out of the spotlight, as the shot meant for her chest tore through his shoulder instead. They went down together in a tangle behind the scenery, flat, and his blood was hot and immediate against her bare arm. And he had her face in both his hands, checking her before he had even registered he'd been hit. "Are you?" His voice was steel. "Sofia, are you hit? Look at me." "You're shot," she said stupidly, her hands coming away red. "I asked," he said, "if you were hit." "No." "Then it's fine," said Lorenzo Vitale, bleeding through his dinner jacket, onto the boards of a 100-year-old stage, and pulled her in against him, and put his own body between hers and the entire screaming world. And Sofia, pressed to his chest in the dark, with the gunfire cracking overhead, understood with perfect clarity that this man would die before he let anything touch her, that he had been ready to since he was 12 years old, and that whatever this thing was between them, it was the realest thing she had ever been allowed to have. It ended the way these things end, fast and ugly, and then very quiet. Lorenzo's men were better, and there were more of them, and they had the high ground he'd seized weeks in advance. The shooter on the catwalk went down. Cesare's net came apart. And in the smoke and cordite aftermath, with the police sirens still minutes away, Lorenzo owned those minutes the way he owned everything else. They brought the old man himself out of the box where he'd come in the end, to watch his great niece die in person. Because he hadn't been able to resist it either. The Vitale men, Sofia would think later, were cursed with the same fatal need to be the one in the room when it mattered. They brought Cesare down to the stage. Lorenzo stood to meet him, one hand pressed to his ruined shoulder, swaying slightly, refusing the men who tried to hold him up. Uncle and nephew faced each other across the boards, where the blood was still wet. "In front of 200 witnesses," Lorenzo said very quietly. "You moved against my house in the open. You fired on a Marchetti on a magistrate's daughter at the reopening of the Massimo, with half of Palermo society watching. He let it land. They saw it, Cesare. The family saw it. There's no version of tonight where you walk away there, Don. There's barely a version where you walk away at all. The old man's face Sofia saw was not afraid. It was furious. The fury of a man who has finally understood he has been outmaneuvered by a boy he never respected. You did all this, Cesare spat. For her, the Marchetti whelp. You let me lose everything for a dancer. I let you lose everything, Lorenzo said, because 20 years ago you made a 12-year-old boy watch you murder children, and you have never once in all that time lost a single hour of sleep over it. His voice never rose. It never did. This isn't revenge, uncle. Revenge would be quick. This is a bill coming due. What happened to Cesare after that, Sofia did not watch, and Lorenzo did not make her, and she did not ask. There are mercies in not knowing, and he gave her that one. The case her father had built was reopened within the month. There was nothing to stop it now, and a great deal suddenly pushing it forward. The harbor came back to its rightful owner. The dead girl's grave got a true name on it at last, beside her parents and her brothers. And Sofia stood at it in the rain, and wept for a family she had been too young to remember. And Lorenzo stood 3 feet behind her, keeping his distance, keeping the world off her shoulders, the way he had her whole life. She found the room by accident in the White House on the cliff in the weeks while his shoulder healed. A door she'd never opened at the end of a hall unlocked. Inside, photographs, hundreds of them, thousands, covering every wall floor to ceiling, 20 years deep. Sofia at 6, blurred in a convent yard. Sofia at 11, at her first bar. Sofia at 14 with the scholarship letter. Sofia in Paris, in Naples, in the wings, on 100 stages caught from 100 dark back rows, by a man who had never once let her see him. Her entire life, watched, witnessed, kept, a shrine or a surveillance file, or she understood standing in the center of it, slowly turning a love letter, written over 2 decades, by a man who had no other language for it. She heard him in the doorway behind her. He didn't come in. He never came into the rooms that were hers, and somehow this room full of her had always been hers. I should have told you it was here, he said quietly. I should have told you everything years ago. I told myself the silence was protection. A long breath. It was cowardice. I couldn't bear for you to look at me and see what I am. Sofia turned to face him, surrounded by the evidence of the strangest, darkest, most total devotion she would ever be offered in her life. And what are you? She asked. Lorenzo Vitale stood in the doorway, with his arm in a sling, and his face stripped of every mask, and for the first time since the night he'd emptied a theater to watch her dance alone, he told her the simple truth. A man, he said, who has loved you since he was 12 years old and didn't have a word for it, who took everything from you and spent his whole life trying to give it back and never could, who will let you walk out that gate tonight if you ask me to, and have you across 3 borders by morning and never ever come near you again. His voice did not break, but it came very close. And who is asking you for the first time in your life, giving you a real choice, with nothing arranged, no door opened, no string pulled to stay. Not because you're in danger. The danger's over. Stay because you want to, or go because you want to. But choose it. It's yours. It was always supposed to be yours. The sea thundered far below, and Sofia Marchetti, who had spent 26 years living inside a life another person built, who had finally, on a gala stage with bullets in the air, stood up in the light and claimed her own name, looked at the man who had buried her family and saved her life and watched over her from the dark for 20 years, and she understood that he had finally, at the very end, given her the one thing he'd never given her before, a door he had not opened for her. She walked to him across the room full of her own face. You watched me from the dark my whole life, she said, stopping close enough that he had to look down. I'm tired of the dark, Lorenzo. She lifted her hand and pressed it flat against his chest, over the slow, hard beat of his heart. Come into the light. Stay where I can see you. That's my choice. Her eyes held his. You're the only thing in my whole life I ever actually chose. Don't make me say it twice. For a moment, the most dangerous man in 3 provinces could not speak at all. Then his good arm came around her, and he bent his scarred face to hers. And outside the storm broke open over the sea, and the boy who had carried a girl out of a fire, finally after 20 years, set her down somewhere safe, not behind walls, not in a cage, not in the dark of a back row, but here, in the light, with both of them choosing it at last. They say in the 3 coastal provinces between Trapani and the sea that the old theater in the little town reopened that next spring, and that on opening night, a woman with a magistrate's name danced the principal role to a full and roaring house. They say a man sat in the front row, a man people still cross themselves about, and that, for once, the whole town watched him as much as they watched her. This cold creature who had never been seen to feel anything, sitting in the light where everyone could see his eyes, never once leaving the stage. And they say that when she finished, when the house came to its feet, and the roses came down like rain, she did not bow to the audience first. She turned in the spotlight, and she bowed to the man in the front row. And he stood in front of everyone in the light and bowed back.